We are dancing in the discomfort zone today with Nancy Ferraro, attorney, author, keynote speaker, whose enthusiasm for life and her compassion for humanity are key values that she lives by. A fierce protector, she is passionate about serving and empowering others with legal expertise, specifically in estate planning, probate, and guardianship. Nancy shapes futures and builds legacies that fulfill her clients' desires. Consistent with her compassion and service mindset, she adopted her beautiful son, George, from Romania and gained unique insights into parenting and decisions affecting children because George has several disabilities, including fetal alcohol syndrome. And for almost a decade, Nancy had to deal with the almost daily violence that FAS produced in him. And so I'm honored that she's willing to share her story to help build our empathy for people who deal with circumstances vastly different than our own, which is one of the hallmarks of emotional intelligence and being able to dance in discomfort. Nancy, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a thrill to be with you, Anne.
Yeah, it's great to have you. You know, I the beauty of this podcast is I get to invite guests that have all kinds of different levels of experience, and yours is unique in the 370 something episodes that we've had so far, in talking about severe disability and how that impacts parents. But also how that impacts your ability and the child's ability to function in the world. So tell us about George. How old is he now? Tell us a little bit about your experience.
To start at the beginning, when we adopted George from Romania, we thought we were getting a neurotypical child. George landed in the suburbs of New Jersey, a feral child. He was a wild animal in the body of a boy. He has a host of disabilities ranging from fetal alcohol syndrome, which, as you know, produces enormous violence in children, to attachment disorder, low IQ. He had lack of oxygen to his brain at birth, so that caused all kinds of problems. And what we did not realize was that we could not love it out of him. And that was a steep learning curve for me.
Ooh.
Right? You think
Yeah.
and when a doctor says to you developmental delay, in our terms, it means a delay. He'll catch up.
Yeah. You'll catch up.
Well,
Yeah.
that's not what it means in the medical world. Apparently, it's a term of art that means you have a permanent disability. And the turning point for us, and the only time I was able to wrap my arms around getting help for George, was when I finally woke up to the fact that mommy, could not fix it. And learning that reaching out for help was not a sign of weakness, but a sign of strength and courage. And I think for most parents who experience traumatic parenting, whether it's through criminality, mental illness, drug abuse,
Yep.
addiction, even bad behavior. I mean, your teenager will kill you before they, grow up. Probably. I don't mean
Guilty.
I don't mean really kill you. I mean,
Right.
they crush our spirits before they, get a brain. Anyway, it's all that. And when we realize that we can't solve it, not only do we blame ourselves, but society blames us, right? So the issue around that is we as mothers, we don't want to talk about it. And when we emerged basically vertical from this adventure that is Hurricane George, I felt a responsibility and a need to tell that story because the mother of Son of Sam never wrote a book. We don't want to shine a light on that shame because we take it on as our own, right?
Right.
But at the end of the day, I realized that something good had to come out of all of the suffering because in the middle of it, there was helplessness, hopelessness, darkness, loneliness, desperation. And I want other mothers and other people who have stood in the shoes of motherhood to know you're not alone. You are not meant to do this alone. And there are people out there. So I wrote my book, When the Bow Breaks, to shed light, share hope, form community. And it's been a very lovely, heartening experience, as heartbreaking as it is, to know that other parents are experiencing this. When parents come up to me and want to have a hug and say, oh my gosh, I don't feel so alone anymore. That's what fills me. That's what fills my cup. And so I'm on a mission to spread that message.
Yeah. Well, and that's a key part of dancing in the discomfort zone is your own internal experience with it and being able to move out of the desire to hide and the desire to isolate. So let's talk about your experience, your internal experience first, and then I want to move on to George and what you did and how you move into the world with this child who's your responsibility. So how did you get from I can't, I mean, and when you said that, I can't love this out of him. As mommy, I can't fix that. Like, I'm not a parent, but my heart broke in that moment. I can feel what that must have been like. How do you get from, desperate to control it, fix it, love it, and realizing I can't do this by myself? I need to go get help. I need to let this shame go. How do you make that leap, right?
Well, I'm not exactly proud of it, but I did a lot of doctor shopping. The first neuropsychologist that I brought George to in the United States said, this child belongs in an institution. He was 4 at the time. And I put her down as a quack, left her practice, and started doctor shopping. And the more doctor shopping I did, I think I was on the phone with 4 different psychiatrists one day who wanted to just put George on drugs, see you in 2 weeks, didn't make eye contact with him, didn't look at him. And then finally, one neurologist backed me up against the wall and said, Nancy, if George had diabetes, would you deny him the medication? And that's when it hit me. I have to adjust my expectations for this child. I had that bow breaking moment. It is that instant when you realize that I can't fix this. I have to redefine my relationship with my child. I have to redefine my expectations. I have to learn to take joy in those little moments because there aren't going to be big moments.
And that's I mean, do you have other children or is George your only child?
Yes. So I have another child, a natural child, and I was trying to give my older son a little brother.
Mm.
Well, I did exactly the opposite. And I don't think there's any amount of therapy that's going to remove that guilt. But looking at my older son and seeing what a beautiful human being he's turned into, he's a man of whom I can be proud. And realizing that had he been an only child, he might have been very self centered, very selfish, and he's turned into an empathetic, lovely man. Now, let's not disregard the fact that he has scars.
There's still pain. Yeah. Yep.
But when you're plunged into a situation, it's like being foisted with your own petard. You have a sword through you. Do you pull it out or leave it there? What does the least amount of damage? So
Mhm.
I dealt with that as best I could for him and tried to give him as normal a childhood as I could.
Yep.
But when you have that kind of violence in your home every single day, it's difficult.
Yeah. Yep. And so your mindset was I need to change my expectations of this child. That's how we get through this and how we get him through this in the best possible way. How do you make that shift? Because it's a decision, right? It's a decision to say, let me change these expectations. But you've got parental expectations from your whole life, from your parents, from society, from all that stuff. And you're saying, I need to do this differently and have different expectations. I think that's such a healthy thing, but it's so hard. And I think it's where people get stuck, right?
Yeah. When you realize even Norman Rockwell wasn't Norman Rockwell, when everything wasn't perfect. And there's an expression in Spanish called el que dirá. What will people think? El que
Mm.
dirá. So, or what will people say? And once I realized that it was them or me, right? Either I was going to survive this and make way for my child, or I was going to suffer in the shadow of what my in laws thought, neighbors thought, and strangers thought. You can't live there
Yeah.
because you don't make any forward progress. And I don't really know the exact moment that it happened, but I do know that once I made that shift, I was on a mission. Mother on a mission, you can't fight her,
No,
right?
you can't.
And I learned through not through any agency, not through any support group. I learned from a mother in the grocery store. Yeah. I have a wonderful mentor, and she was just a lovely woman. And she said, first of all, let me preface this by saying, this woman, Susan Anderson, she's in my book. I praise her to the heavens because she was changing diapers on a 24-year-old catatonic daughter. And when I would run into her in the grocery store, I used to plan my trips because I knew I was going to see Susan.
Go, yeah.
And I'd be crying on her shoulder and saying, "Oh my gosh, people are treating us badly in public, and why doesn't your child behave, and this and that?" And she would say, "Nancy, aren't we blessed?" And I would say, "Susan, have you lost your mind? What do you mean
Yeah.
blessed?" She said, "Because but for our children, we would be those people."
Mm.
Wow. Right? That might have been the moment because she made me turn it on its head and see it from a completely different perspective. It's
Mm-hmm.
true. But for our children, we would be those people giving others snide looks in
Charge.
the grocery store. And it
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah. Oh yeah, all the time. I mean, yesterday I was in a coffee shop and somebody walked in with two young kids, and I was like, "Oh my god, yeah!" And I caught myself, and still, we do that
Yeah,
when things aren't happening normally. And I think this is important in life. Whether your kid is has ADHD, or whether they have a disability, or whether they're just going through a tough time, or whether it's yourself, and whatever is going on in your life, being able to say, I need to shift the way I'm doing this because it's not working. And I
exactly.
love your perspective of it's them or me. How am I going to do this for the visual of it, or am I going to go ahead and live the life I need to live to be able to thrive?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that's motivating because
Yeah.
you see some glimmer of light. And if I go this way, there's possibility that I can make progress for my child and save my family's sanity.
Yeah. So what did you do?
I did a couple of things and I realized in retrospect, of course, I didn't know what I was doing at the time, but in retrospect, I realized that the first thing I did was sit with the feelings
Mhm.
because you can't address them. There's no power in running away from the feelings, right? Once you sit with it, yeah, this is hard. You acknowledge this is incredibly hard, sometimes impossibly hard,
Mm.
but knowing that and starting to move on from that, that's critical. The second thing I did was I started having meetings in Georgia school and leading with can do, right? So with our children, we spend so much time documenting disabilities,
Mhm.
inabilities, failures, that we forget that, oh my gosh, George got through 2 hours of class and didn't have a meltdown. That was big for us, right? Of course, the afternoon meltdown would cancel out all the good progress in your mind. But when I stopped walking into IEP meetings, those are the special education meetings, and I stopped walking in with a list of problems and started with, here's what George does well, the energy in the room shifted.
Mhm.
And so I suggest to people that they start every advocacy interaction, whether it's with the school district, with doctors, with placement, start with something your child can do, no matter how small, because that becomes the foundation of the conversation. The most important thing for me to remember was that George is not a diagnosis. He is a whole, complex human being. He's got gifts that are crazy genius. He's got insights. He's got a spirit that deserves to be seen.
Mhm.
And that was critical. The other thing I did was know the rules. Obviously, I'm an attorney, but I had no special education knowledge. I had no special education training. You do not have to be a lawyer to advocate for your child.
Mhm.
So I learned my child's rights, and there is a special language to speaking with the school district. And tell you the truth, I didn't learn it from attorneys. I learned it from other mothers,
Well.
which is crazy.
Mhm.
So I learned about FAPE. I learned about Section 504 of the Rehab Act. FAPE guarantees every child a free, appropriate public education. It's federal law. And so many parents walk into those IEP meetings saying, my child is not reaching their potential. Well, guess what? It's not the school district's job to let your child reach their potential. It's their job to give your child a free, appropriate, and public education. And once you start using the language that the Board of Ed uses, they start to get a little more, well, great. I want to say intimidated because it was great. I'd walk into IEP meetings and they say, oh, hello, Mrs. Brood, what can we do for you today? I'm like, damn right. What can you do for me today? And I found myself actually teaching them about Linda Mood Bell and suck, swallow, breathe therapy. And I would get these looks like, why don't you people know this? But I actually took charge of the meetings and advocated for George because there was no other way to make progress. And then of course there's supplemental security income. That's a whole different issue that parents need to know. I was very lucky in that I had social workers in hospitals, in psych wards, who taught me about this. And there is a way when your child is old enough to live in a group home, there's a way to turn your child into a family of one so that he would qualify for SSDI, Social Security Disability, without involving our income. And that was basically a godsend because I had an adoption attorney tell me it would cost $6 million to raise George to child to adulthood. I'm not kidding. $6 million. And that was in the year 2000 to raise George to adulthood. Yeah. So, yeah. So when I say create a team, I mean create a team. Because social workers, mothers, even the state of New Jersey, which really didn't want to help me, once they realized that I knew what I was talking about, they had no choice but to help me. And that was very empowering, very cool.
Well, and one of the things I talk about when I talk about dancing in the discomfort zone, especially situations like this, the more you can learn, the more you're able to be confident because you know your stuff. I mean, I'm advocating with my doctor for hormone replacement after a hysterectomy. It's the same thing. Here's the research that I've done, and they're like, oh wow, okay, cool, great, let's talk about this. But until when you don't know what you're talking about, you don't have that confidence to be able to say, no, you're not listening. Try again.
Yeah. So I've been to Google Med School too, and my doctor doesn't like it when I do that because I hate when my clients go to Google Law School and it's like,
Sure.
no, that's wrong. Step away from the computer. I try to stay in my lane sometimes.
But again, at least you're in the conversation. I mean, as the advocate, as the person having the conversation.
And so that leads into the next step. What happens next? And you have to realize that you're not meant to do this alone. You don't go it alone. You form a team. You change the conversation. You go from a different point. You remember to say thank you. And that is counterintuitive for a lot of people because once we get on that train where we're just pushing, advocating for our children and pushing so hard, sometimes you forget to say, oh my gosh, that was great what you did with the crayons, or that you have to acknowledge people and thank them. And when I say don't go it alone, not only do I mean form a team for yourself, but be a light for someone else because you never know. I always think that maybe the lesson I'm getting here in life is not meant for me. It could be meant for someone watching me who might need the strength, the courage, the grace. And I have to say, I haven't always handled this with grace because it's hard. And I'm not a perfect person and I am certainly no angel. But when I realized that, it made me a little more conscientious of how I was behaving, how I was handling the powers that be. And that really changed the conversation. And when you can be a light for someone else, you never know. In fact, I have a funny story. George was in his first classroom, and when they realized he wasn't picking up language, in the ESL classroom, English as a second language, they put him in the special needs room. And they brought in a speech therapist who was from India, which is fine, except she was teaching the kids to pronounce the color Durple. Durple. Okay, so in typical children, it takes about 150 repetitions to correct something. What about with these kids? So I'm sitting in the parent teacher meeting and I bring this up and bam, compensatory speech for all the kids. The parents were thrilled and you never know. So I inadvertently got everybody compensatory speech therapy because now there's a violation, right?
Mm.
But that was one interaction I particularly enjoyed because they're bold.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I took an anatomy class from somebody. I think he was Arab and he was educated in Germany. So I mean, he had accents upon accents. I had to go and look up a lot of words. Like, how do we say that here in the United States so that I could
Right.
get it
But
in
when
my
you're
ear?
dealing
But
with the
I
special needs
appreciate the challenge.
community, they don't
Oh,
have the power
totally.
to
Yeah.
do that, right? They can't
Right. Right.
interpret. So for George, Durple was a color for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my goodness. And so one of the things that I talk a lot about in my speeches when you're in this changing of expectations and shifting how we're going to do things is looking at what options have I not considered based on my old expectations that now I need to open the door for. Did you do that as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, the doctor
Yeah.
shopping turned into the search for respite, supports,
Mm,
different
mm,
school placements, and it opened a whole world because I didn't realize that not only was it out there, but I had no idea what group homes were. When that first doctor said to me when George was 4, this child belongs in an institution, I had this horrible image of children being tied to beds, and it was horrific.
right.
Once I actually opened my mind to the fact that this child's getting too big and too violent to keep in our home, and we have to lock our doors against him at night, with that kind of changes your perspective, right? And so once I finally started looking at groups homes and I realized they're lovely homes, they're in neighborhoods, the kids live like family, 24/7 staff. Well, George is in heaven because he's got staff now. I didn't have 24/7. And so, yeah, so there are people that go and check on him every 15 minutes during the night to make sure he's not hurting himself and everything's cool and copacetic. Well, where was I going to get that? At home. And I believe that that was the greatest gift I ever gave George because it gave him routine, it gave him safety, it gave him a certain amount of control over his own life. He's the mayor now, and he's living his best life. And it really saved us
He's got
as
a
a family.
staff. I love it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
George has staff,
Mhm.
and oh boy, he's all about it.
Right? I don't have staff.
Me neither.
So how old is George? Yeah, right. How old is George now?
George is 29.
Okay. And he's living in a group home. He's got that all of that support and
Yes, he's got
doing
great
it,
support.
living it up.
He's got a Wawa addiction. He loves the coffee. And so, yeah, I have to watch him because one month he spent $300 on coffee. I'm like, George, I'm not funding this coffee addiction, dude. Chill out. But he's in a day program. They take him into the community and they do outings, and it is the best of all possible worlds, Dr. Pangloss, for George. It really is. And he has no idea that he's different than anybody else. It's just he lives in a different place and he's well cared for. There's nothing more I could ask.
Well, and my understanding with because I have a background in special ed as well, with fetal alcohol syndrome, with a lot of neurotypical situations, not having that structure, not having that support, sends the neurological system all haywire, which creates the meltdowns, which creates the violence, and so it's not a decision. It is part of that dysregulation. Is that what Georgia's situation is?
Well, yeah, it's never a decision.
Mm.
His eyes would
Yeah.
glaze over and George would go away and this
Mm.
monster would emerge. And when it was over, he would just ask for a snack. Like it never happened. And, I always liken George to the fat man who jumps in the pool. right? The fat man who jumps in the pool is always fine. Everybody else is bobbing for their lives. And that's how it was. And I would look at him like, how can you ask me for a snack or the remote control when I'm still trying to recover from protective holds on the floor for 3 hours?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
And so now that he has the structure, he has the support, he has that, the regulation is more regular. Is he doing better as far as outbursts and things like that?
He's doing much better. He still has outbursts, but they're fewer, far between. The town in which he lives, the police officers know him. And when he does rage, if they have to call the police and they can't calm him down, instead of arresting my child, they take him to the hospital, let him calm down, take him home. They all know and love him. And that's the critical thing. Even though he lives in New Jersey and I'm in Florida now, there's no way I could ever move him because he's settled and he's stable.
Mm-hmm. And he has that community, he has that support.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Wonderful.
Yeah, yeah. Best possible outcome, it sounds like.
It is. It is.
And so what do you say when, because I'm sure people are listening to this, perhaps judging like they do in the grocery store. What do you say when somebody is outwardly rude? I mean, it's unavoidable, it's uncomfortable, but how do you deal with that?
Just like anything. When anyone's rude to you in real time, there's pause, and sometimes I say, "Would you repeat that?" Or
Mm.
I will mirror it back to them and say, "Did you just say?" And it gives them a moment to save themselves,
Mhm.
right? To save the situation. Oh no, I was just, thank you. I appreciate that. Move on. I
Mhm.
have learned that you become like the 4 or 5 people you surround yourself with. I no longer spend time with those people. I spend time with people who are putting the pure, the good, and the powerful into themselves and want to achieve the good, the pure, and the powerful because that's who I aspire to be.
Mm. I love it. Love it. And such an important piece, right? Is the empathy doesn't cost us anything. You know, that judgment, that rudeness doesn't cost, I mean, the not doing that doesn't cost anything. And when we do it, it costs a lot. Sometimes, like the fat man in the pool, not you, but it causes great waves around you.
And you know this,
Yeah. Yeah.
being in the mental health field, you know that when you harbor anger, resentment, hatred, you're giving someone power over you.
Mm.
And ain't nobody paying rent in my head.
Right? You got plenty to worry about without that. So if people were interested in your book, in hearing you speak, or in perhaps your estate planning or probate services from a legal standpoint, how can they find you?
Well, I can put all my contact information in the show notes if you
Perfect.
like.
Yeah.
The book is called When the Bow Breaks, A Mother's Story of Carnage, Courage, and the Triumph of Faith. It is available on Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, wherever books are sold. And of course, my speaking opportunities will all be in the show notes. I love, love, love to speak to groups of parents, and that is my heart. And also, hand in hand with that, because I'm a special needs mom. Of course, the special needs planning comes into play because you don't plan, you could devastate your child financially once you're gone.
Mm. Yeah. Right. Especially if they're not able to earn that money themselves.
I had a mom raise her hand in one of my presentations. She said, "Guess what? My 9-year-old, autistic, is my beneficiary on all my accounts." And after I fell on the floor, picked myself up, I said, "Please don't do that." Because if that child needs SSDI, Social Security, Disability Income, Medicaid, any Title 19 benefits, they can't have money in their own name. Not only that, if you were to pass and you have a 9-year-old, anyone under 18 is beneficiary, the court takes over until the child is 18, and then guess what? They get settled with a windfall. What do
Mm.
you think is going to happen when that an 18-year-old autistic child becomes in charge? Even a typical kid. I
High
mean,
functioning. Yeah. Right. Right.
yeah, my son would have bought a Maserati. My older one buy a Maserati and be living in it the next year, right?
Yeah.
You can't trust 18-year-olds, no matter what their condition is with
Mm.
money, unless you have an old soul. So there are those things that are enlightening to people because they don't know what they don't know. And they're not supposed to know the law. I mean, why would they? So it's so heartening for me to correct those things and then help them put themselves in a place where they know they'll have a guardian if something happens. So many times we think, I'll just take care of my child until I die. Well, but then what?
And not be able to.
Then
Right.
you're throwing a child into an unfamiliar situation. There's going to be blowback, right? Better to make those arrangements now while you can transition them slowly and they can get used to it and you're still here.
Mm. Yep. Yep. All this is so important. And I love what you said, where it's like, I don't know what I don't know. I'm not supposed to know this stuff. And so if we're not reaching out, we're not getting that information, you're not going to have that information. You're not going to have that confidence. You're not going to be able to advocate and do the things that are going to help. I'm actually speaking for the Michigan Guardianship Association in this fall, and this gives me a whole different perspective on what they're doing. So thank you so much, Nancy, for your courage, for sharing this with us. I mean, as a parent of a child with a special needs, this is vitally, vitally important, but I think it is relevant to everyone. So I'm so glad that you're out there spreading the word.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I always say, love alone is not enough, but advocacy is love in motion. And that is sacred and beautiful. So, all parents out there, anyone who's listening, be encouraged.
I love it. Perfect place to end. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, everybody, for joining us on Dancing in the Discomfort Zone. If you've got comments, please let us know. We'd love to hear it. And again, all of Nancy's information will be in the show notes, and we will make sure that you can get in touch with her if you want. Thanks for listening.